Oh, hello. Yes, just wanted to share with you this video discussion, I think it is, basically on GB News this afternoon. I think it does very much show the kind of right-wing mindset in and around what the law is there for, and also in particular in and around the way that certain types of protest are absolutely fine and other types of protest aren't. Anyway, let's see what they have to say
about this. Thank you for joining us, Calvin. I mean, one of the things I worry, because Grant Shapps has said that there is some loopholes that potentially needs to be closed in order to prevent vandals. But even if we disagree, or some people might disagree with this result, there is a worry that there could be a counter-reaction to push through illiberal policies against people protesting. I mean, do you worry about that at all?
Okay, just before he answers, yes, I've done a couple of videos on this now. There already is the new Priti Patel police crime sentencing bill expressly tackles statues and memorials being defaced, and this, in inverted commas, loophole will be completely obliterated by that, because you won't have a jury trial, and you could face up to 10 years in jail, probably not under a magistrate, but certainly that is the intention is that a magistrate will slap a £2,500 fine, even if you kind of like basically desecrate something that's on a memorial, like for example a wreath on a war memorial.
I do, and we should always be cautious whenever the government says they want to clamp down on protesting. As we saw last year around COVID, they wanted to really stamp it out so that they couldn't see any be held to account, and we don't want that.
Right, okay, yeah, I mean, you notice there that he says about COVID protests, which is something that Calvin thinks is very important to hold the government to account. Yes, but isn't that just protest full stop, Calvin? We don't really need to sort of have... Well, I don't know. I mean, he talks later on about political protests, and I would argue the COVID ones to a certain extent are. Let's move on.
Not at all. But what this is a loophole in the law around criminal damage. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I've taken a lot of stick.
Right, okay. First up, I just want to point out that the picture of the Queen's gone in the background. That lasted for exactly as long as the Oxford University Queen picture disappearing story did, which was about 2 weeks. And we now have a little bit of iconography, presumably to go on with his new religious affairs correspondent status. I'm going to keep an eye on this just to see how long that lasts. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a long time. Yes, anyway, Calvin says about a loophole in the law. Well, okay, to a certain extent. I mean, but that's semantics, isn't it? It's the law, you'll find.
On Twitter for commenting on this case over the last couple of days. But the clause is quite clear that for it to be criminal damage, there has to be damage to the property. Okay, so we all saw that was on video. The property has to belong to someone else. It clearly didn't belong to the protesters. And there has to be intent to damage or reckless behaviour with no care for damage. We saw that. We saw all three of those clauses being met. The fourth one, the loophole, is that the defendant can have a legal excuse for damaging the property. And that's what we're seeing, in that these four, the Colston four, have said they had a legal excuse for damaging the property. And that is...
Right, okay then. So, in other words, it's the law. Yeah, that's kind of the way that the law works. The law is full of loopholes, which means that, the law should be applied in this case unless this happens, in which case it's not. Now, you can call that a loophole, which makes it sound like a very bad thing, or perhaps it's there for a very particular reason.
To prevent further crime, to prevent hate crime, as if a statue in itself can be a hate crime. Now,
right, can a statue be a hate crime? Yes, I would argue it could. Think about Confederate statues in places in America, which are seen by certain sections of American society as being quite oppressive. Imagine if you put up a statue, just to remind everyone of the history, for example, of Adolf Hitler in Warsaw, or in Rome. What do you think the reaction would be? That would be, I think, by anyone's definition, or that would constitute a hate crime.
I've said on record that I think this sets a very bad precedent, and I'm not talking about legal precedent, I'm talking about a general precedent in the country, in that if we say it's okay for you to damage public property or other people's property if you think it's offensive, which is what a hate crime is, therefore anyone can knock down any statue or any public memorial that they feel uncomfortable with.
Right. Yes, at which point, yes, that would be an excuse. But these cases are always the exception. I'll just show you this, which is I don't know quite what you'd call them, the BAE-2. A couple of people who committed criminal damage to a jet fighter because it was being used to assist the Saudi government in terms of it bombing its neighbours. And these two guys were acquitted on this very, in inverted commas, loophole that Calvin is saying. So there is very much legal precedent here. It's not an excuse. It is people saying we have done this for distinctly and moral reasons.
And Darren Grimes put out a witty tweet yesterday. Should we all go and knock down Karl Marx's statue because his ideology has killed millions of people around the world? Of course, it was tongue-in-cheek. He never would do it. But this is the problem, isn't it? If we...
Right, okay, and as lots of people jumped on Owen's tweet, which he quickly backtracked on to magically make it a funny one. Karl Marx's statue, in inverted commas, is actually his grave. And he's a Jewish person, and I don't think it would look particularly good for a right-wing person to desecrate a Jewish grave. Call me a fool, if you like. I'm sure some people will. But I don't think that's the same thing, Calvin.
See something that we can claim is offensive, we now have a loophole in the law to say, yeah, I'm going to go and be a vigilante, and rather than follow the democratic process. And this is why I'm so upset about this case, because these thugs, these vandals, these rioters had a democratic process. They could.
Okay, and again, notice the language. 4 people were in court, and yet they're still described as thugs, vandals, and rioters. They were acquitted, Calvin.
Could have either stood for office, they could have voted for different people in Bristol in the local elections, or they could have had their say through petitions and protests, which I know that some of them have done. But the problem is they didn't do that. They chose unlawful action, and they got away with it because the jury looked at the case through a political lens, and it's out.
Right, okay, just a few things there. I'll give a link below about the kind of historical stuff in and around Bristolians trying to get rid of the statue. And, you know, if this incident hadn't happened when it did, there's a really good chance that by now he would have ended up in a museum anyway, because that's very much the direction of travel in and around this one. It was basically people arguing about what should go on a plaque next to the statue that delayed its removal. And yeah, sorry, I've lost my thread.
Outrageous.
Calvin, I think you make an important point about maybe there is a conversation then as a society to move this conversation on and look at whether or not we have enough local democracy within society.
Oh, sorry, yes, just to finish off there, sensible point. Yes, Calvin says it was a political point. Well, yes, I mean, you can make political points in court, and the fact that these people were doing their actions for what they felt was a justified political reason is a reason, and it's something that probably would stand up in court. And again, I'll talk about I'll point you to the BAE too. What they did was a political thing. That's the way those things work. Anyway, I'll leave it at that point. But I think, the key takeaway with this, of course, is that right-wing view about property. There is nothing more deadly for a right-winger than the concept of someone getting away with a property crime compared to a crime against an individual or individuals. Yeah. Slaver. Statue to a slaver in a city with a large black population. How is that particularly different from a Confederate general in the USA in a southern state? I would argue not at all. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm sure I'm wrong. I teach sociology.